The week my mother's estate was settled, everyone in the room already knew how it was going to go. My older brother had built his entire identity around being the chosen one. And honestly, for most of our lives, he was right. My mother, June Calloway. No, that name's taken. My mother's name was Vera Sinclair. She was the kind of woman who kept every birthday card she ever received stacked in shoeboxes under her bed, organized by year. She grew up in rural Tennessee, moved to Georgia in her 20s, and spent 40 years building something from nothing. What she built was a catering company, Sinclair's Table, that eventually became one of the most respected catering operations in the greater Atlanta area. Wedding season, she booked solid from March through October. Corporate accounts, hospital galas, charity dinners. By the time I was in high school, the business had 12 full-time employees and a commercial kitchen she'd leased and renovated herself. My brother's name is Owen. He's 6 years older than me, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who fills a doorway and knows it. He joined the business right out of college, just like everyone expected him to. He learned the accounts, managed the staff during peak season, drove the vans when someone called out sick. For years, my mother introduced him at industry events as her successor. She said it with pride. Owen soaked it up like he'd been waiting his whole life for the moment. I went a different direction. I became a physical therapist. My mother supported that decision completely. She always said she wanted us to find our own paths. But the unspoken understanding in our family was that Owen would carry on what she'd built. That was just how it was. Nobody said it out loud Nobody had to. What I haven't told you yet is what happened when my mother got sick. 3 years before she died, she was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. The progression was slow at first. She adapted. She used a cane, then a walker. She modified her kitchen routines. She kept working. But by the second year, the tremors made certain things impossible, and by the third year, she needed help with almost everything. Owen was busy. I understood that. Or, I told myself I did. He had the business to run, staff to manage, clients to keep happy. He lived 40 minutes away in a suburb north of the city. He had 2 kids, a wife who worked full-time, a schedule that moved fast. He called on Sundays, he visited on holidays, he showed up when it was convenient, and I never once heard my mother complain about it. I, on the other hand, lived 12 minutes from her house. So I became the one who drove her to neurology appointments every 6 weeks. I became the one who researched medication interactions at 11 at night when her pharmacist flagged something her doctor had missed. I became the one who rearranged my patient schedule on Tuesdays so I could spend the afternoon helping her sort her accounts receivable, because her hands shook too much to type accurately and she was too proud to hire someone to do it for her. I installed grab bars in her bathroom. I set up a medical alert system she refused to wear until I cried about it, and she finally agreed just to make me stop. I was the one she called at 2 in the morning when she fell getting out of bed, and I drove over in the dark, and I sat with her on the floor until we figured out together how to get her up safely without calling 911. She never once asked me to do any of it. I never once asked her to thank me. That was just how we were. The business side of things was Owen's world. I stayed out of it. I didn't know the accounts, didn't know the contracts, didn't know what she owed or who owed her. I knew she'd taken out a loan about 4 years before she got sick to expand the kitchen and add a second refrigerated van. I knew the business was profitable because she told me so when I asked once, and that was the extent of what I knew. When she died, peacefully, in her own bed, on a Thursday morning in early April. I had been sleeping in her guest room for the previous 3 weeks. Owen came to say goodbye the last weekend. He stayed 2 days. He cried at the funeral. He gave a beautiful eulogy. And 2 weeks later, we sat in the office of her attorney, a quiet woman named Ms. Tran, who had handled my mother's affairs for 15 years and who had the kind of steady, practiced expression that gave nothing away. The family was there. My aunt. 2 cousins. Owen's wife, seated beside him with her hand on his arm. I sat on the other side of the table, alone. I hadn't thought to bring anyone. Miss Tran opened her folder and began to read. Sinclair's table, the business, the equipment, the client contracts, the commercial kitchen lease, the van, the second van, all of it passed entirely to Owen. The house passed to me. My mother's house was a 3-bedroom craftsman on a half-acre lot in a quiet neighborhood east of the city. She'd bought it in 1991 for $60,000. The roof was original. The HVAC had been replaced once, badly, in 2009. The back porch had a soft spot in the flooring that she'd been meaning to fix for 4 years. It needed work. Everyone knew it needed work. Owen knew it better than anyone, because he'd used that fact to wave off any conversation about the property for years. That house is going to cost whoever gets it, he used to say. It's basically a money pit wrapped in siding. When Ms. Tran finished reading the primary distribution, Owen leaned back in his chair. He looked over at me with this expression I can only describe as satisfied. Not mean, exactly. Just certain of himself in that way he'd always been. Well, he said, I guess that settles it. Someone at the table, I think it was my aunt, made a small sound. She got the house, Owen said, gesturing toward me the way you'd gesture toward a piece of furniture. And I got what actually matters. A few people shifted in their seats. Mom always knew you'd be more comfortable in a smaller situation, he added. You never had much interest in business anyway. I looked down at the table. My jaw was tight. I was 34 years old and sitting in a room full of people, watching my brother explain my own mother's wishes back to me. And I could not think of a single thing to say that wouldn't end in me, either crying or saying something I couldn't take back. Then he said the part that made everything go quiet. He looked directly at me with a small smile, and he said, You know, if you'd spent a little more time learning the business and a little less time being her caretaker, maybe she would have trusted you with something real. The room went completely still. I felt something move through my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. My cousin across the table looked at her hands. Owen's wife looked at the window. My aunt opened her mouth and closed it again. Miss Tran set down the folder she was holding. Actually, she said, in exactly the same tone she'd been using for everything else. There is one additional item your mother asked me to address. She was quite specific that it be presented separately, after the primary distribution was read. Owen looked at her. The smile was still on his face, but it had stopped moving. Miss Tran reached into a separate section of her briefcase and removed a smaller envelope. The kind you'd find at a stationery shop, cream-colored with my mother's handwriting on the front. She also removed a set of stapled documents that I didn't recognize. Your mother left a letter, she said, and a separate attachment, which I'll explain in a moment. She asked that the letter be read aloud. I don't know when I started holding my breath. I don't know when the room got that particular quality of silence. The kind where you can hear the air conditioning and nothing else. Miss Tran unfolded the letter. I want to start, she began reading, by saying that I am proud of both of my children. Owen, you gave 30 years of your life to building something alongside me, and I don't take that lightly. The business is yours because you understand it, and because you earned that understanding through real work. I trust you to take care of the people who depend on it. Owen nodded. He was watching Miss Tran with the focused expression of a man who expects to keep winning. But I need to say something that I was never good at saying when I was alive. The room shifted. For the last 3 years, one person in this family showed up every single time I needed something. Not when it was convenient. Not when it was comfortable. Every time. I am talking about early mornings and late nights and appointments and paperwork, and the kind of help that nobody sees because it happens in private, in a bathroom with a grab bar and a kitchen table and a phone call at 2 in the morning. Owen's expression changed. It didn't collapse all at once. It changed the way ice changes. Slowly, and then suddenly. That person never once asked me what she would receive in return. She never brought up the business. She never asked about the house. She asked me what I needed for breakfast and whether my physical therapist thought I should change my stretching routine. She is the reason I died in my own home instead of a facility, which was the only thing I truly asked of God in my final years. My throat had closed entirely. I could feel my aunt looking at me from across the table. I didn't look back. Miss Tran turned the page. What I am leaving her is not a consolation prize. I need everyone in this room to understand that. She paused here. Miss Tran herself paused, just briefly, the way you do when something lands differently than you expected. 5 years ago, a commercial developer approached me about the property. Not the house, the land behind it. I own an additional parcel, 1 1/3 acres, that has been sitting behind the fence line since I bought the lot in 1991. I never built on it. I barely thought about it, honestly. But I had the deed, and when the developer came to me, I had a real estate attorney look into exactly what that parcel was zoned for. Owen leaned forward. I watched him do it. I watched something shift in his posture. It turns out, Miss Tran continued reading, that the rear parcel was rezoned for mixed commercial and residential development in 2018 as part of the county's East Atlanta Corridor expansion plan. I did not seek this rezoning. It simply happened, and I did not fully understand what it meant until my attorney explained it to me. Silence. 3 months ago, I signed a preliminary letter of intent with a developer. The details are in the attachment Ms. Tran has in front of her. The short version is this. The rear parcel, combined with the house, lot under a lot consolidation agreement, represents a development opportunity the firm valued at approximately $1.4 million. That figure reflects current market conditions and the corridor's projected growth over the next 10 years. I heard someone make a small, involuntary noise. I think it was me. I did not tell anyone about this while I was alive because I did not want it to change how anyone treated me. I knew what I had. I chose who would receive it. I chose her not because she is my daughter, and not because she needed it, but because she is the kind of person who does the right thing without expecting anything back, and those are exactly the people who should have something good happen to them. Owen's chair scraped the floor slightly. He'd leaned forward so far that he'd shifted his weight. And because I know my son, I want to say this plainly. The business you inherited carries a remaining equipment loan of $62,000, 3 active vendor contracts with penalty clauses, and a commercial kitchen lease with 4 years remaining at a rate that has not kept pace with the neighborhood. It is profitable. It can remain profitable if you run it well. But it is not simple, and it is not free. I hope you will treat the people who work for you the way I treated them. If you do, you'll be fine. She signed it. With all my love, Mom. The room did not explode. That's not the right word for what happened. It was more like the air went out of everything at once. My aunt put both hands flat on the table. My cousin turned to look at Owen. Owen was staring at the documents Tran had slid across to him. The preliminary development agreement, the lot survey, the valuation summary, and he was reading them the way a person reads something they are trying to find an error in, moving his eyes back and forth fast, looking for the place where it stops being true. This can't be, he started. It is accurate, Ms. Tran said. She didn't say it unkindly. She just said it. The rear parcel. How did she even? She's owned it for over 30 years, Ms. Tran said. It was included in her original purchase. The rezoning occurred through the county's 2018 corridor plan. She became aware of its implications approximately 5 years ago when a developer contacted her directly. Owen set the papers down. He picked them up again. He set them down. I watched my brother, the man who had spent our entire lives being the one who understood things, the one who knew how money worked and what mattered and what was real, sit there in a law office and try to process the fact that the thing he'd dismissed his whole life had turned out to be worth more than the thing he'd built his identity around. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly. I felt like I was underwater, processing everything about 3 seconds behind everyone else. I felt the press of the last 3 years sitting in my chest. The appointments, the grab bars, the 2 a.m. phone calls, and I felt my mother in that letter, in every sentence. And the way she'd noticed what I'd done, even when I thought nobody was noticing. I thought about the fact that she'd held on to this for 5 years and never said a word, never hinted, never gave me any reason to think I was doing anything other than what a daughter was supposed to do. That's the part that finally broke me open, sitting there at that table. Not the money, not Owen's expression. The fact that she'd seen me, she had been watching the whole time and she had seen me, and she'd found a way to say so. Ms. Tran gave me a moment. She was good at her job. There are next steps, she said quietly, whenever you're ready to discuss them. The letter of intent is preliminary. The development agreement will require your formal acceptance and the involvement of a real estate attorney on your end. There's no urgency this week. I nodded. I couldn't speak. When we stood to leave, Owen didn't say anything to me. He gathered his papers and he put on his jacket and he walked out ahead of his wife, who touched my arm briefly as she passed. Just a touch, no words. And then they were gone. My aunt stayed. She hugged me for a long time without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. My cousin said, "Your mom would have loved seeing this." And I thought yes, she would have. And I also thought she already did. I drove home the long way, past the neighborhood where I grew up, past the diner where my mother used to take me on Saturday mornings, when Owen had baseball and it was just the two of us, past the park where she taught me to ride a bike in a parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, running alongside me and letting go without telling me she was letting go, because she knew I'd overthink it if I knew. I thought about what she'd written. The line I kept coming back to wasn't the one about the money. It was the one buried in the middle of the letter. The one Miss Tran had read without pausing. She asked me what I needed for breakfast. That was it. That was the whole thing. I'd spent 3 years showing up, and the thing my mother remembered, the thing she'd chosen to put in a letter that would be read in front of everyone after she was gone, was that I'd asked her what she wanted for breakfast. I don't know what Owen will do with the business. I think he'll be fine. My mother wouldn't have left it to him if she didn't believe that. I think the employees will be okay. I think the catering company will keep serving wedding receptions and hospital galas for another 20 years if Owen does what he's capable of doing. I know what I'm going to do with the property. I've already met with a real estate attorney, a different one, recommended by Ms. Tran. And we've begun reviewing the development agreement. The lot consolidation process takes time. There are surveys to commission and county approvals to navigate and decisions to make about what kind of development makes sense for that corridor, for that neighborhood, for what my mother would have actually wanted on that land. I think about her in that house for 30 years, with that acre and a third sitting behind the fence line, not thinking much about it. Not because she didn't understand real estate, because she had a business to run and kids to raise, and later a body that was failing her by degrees, and the land was just there, quiet and patient, the way some things are. I think she knew it was for me. Not right away. I don't think she planned it from the beginning. But at some point in the last 5 years, she figured it out. She looked at what she had, and she looked at what I was doing, and she made a decision that she never once mentioned to me. That's how she loved. Quietly, and then all at once. Owen called me 2 weeks later. He didn't apologize exactly. He's not built for that, but he said he'd been thinking. And he said that he knew he hadn't been around as much as he should have been, and he said he was sorry, things had felt uneven. It was a careful, lawyered kind of sorry, the kind where someone is acknowledging something without fully naming it. I told him I appreciated the call. I told him I hoped the business went well. I told him I meant it, because I did. We're still siblings. We'll probably have stilted Thanksgivings for a while. We'll probably figure it out eventually, the way families do when the crisis is over, and everyone has to decide whether to be honest about what happened, or to smooth it over and move on. I don't know which way we'll go yet. I'm not sure he knows either. What I know is that I sat on my mother's back porch the week after the reading, in the October light, looking out at the fence line and the acre and a third of quiet land beyond it. The grass needed cutting. There was a tree at the far edge that had been losing branches for years. It looked like nothing. It looked exactly like what Owen had always said it was. An old house and a scruffy piece of land that wasn't worth thinking about. I stayed out there for a long time. My mother was right. I never asked what I was going to inherit. I never thought about it, not once, not really, not even at the end, when I probably should have been more practical about the whole thing. I showed up because she was my mother and she needed me, and I loved her, and there was no version of me that could have done anything else. She knew that about me. She knew it better than I did, maybe, and she trusted me with the future because of it. I still have the shoeboxes, the birthday cards, organized by year from under her bed. I brought them home after the house was cleared. I haven't opened them yet. I'm not sure I'm ready for what's in there. 40 years of her handwriting, 40 years of her noticing things about the people she loved and taking the time to write it down. But I will, when I'm ready. She taught me that things worth having are worth waiting for.